Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rachel Stern, and I'm the director and CEO of the Fritz Ascher Society for Persecuted, Ostracized, and Banned Art based in New York. We research, discuss, publish, and exhibit artists whose life and work were affected by the German Nazi regime between 1933 and 1945. Welcome to Remembering Friedel, an intimate view of Friedel Dzubas. Born in 1915 in Berlin, Friedel Dzubas fled persecution from the German Nazi regime, coming to the United States in 1939. It is my pleasure to welcome today's distinguished speakers, the curator and critic Karen Wilkin, and the artist Sandi Slone, who both knew Friedel Dzubas professionally and personally, and frequented his studio during his years in Boston, where he taught and made some of his most characteristic work. Karen Wilkin is a New York-based curator and critic. Educated at Barnard College and Columbia University, she's the author of monographs on Stuart Davis, David Smith, Anthony Caro, Isaac Rütgen, Kenneth Noland, Helen Frankenthaler, Giorgio Morandi, George Braque, and Hans Hofmann, and has organized exhibitions of their work internationally. She was a juror for the American Pavilion of the 2009 Venice Biennale and a contributing editor of the Stuart Davis and the Hans Hofmann paintings catalogs Resonate. The contributing editor for Art for the Hudson Review and a regular contributor to the New Criterion and the Wall Street Journal, Ms. Wilkin teaches in the New York Studio School's MFA program. Sandi Slone is a New York-based painter educated at the Boston Museum School, Tufts University, and Wellesley College. Her paintings have been exhibited extensively with 42 solo and 130 group shows internationally. Many of her works are held in distinguished museums and private collections, including the Museum of Modern Art, New York. She has taught at Harvard University, Brandeis University, and the School of Visual Arts, New York, among other institutions. Sandi Slone is the co-founder of Art OMI International and founding board member of the Field Sculpture Park in Ghent, New York. Among other honors, she has received a Ford Foundation Fellowship. Welcome, Karen and Sandi.
Thank you, Rachel. It's a pleasure to be here and very nice to be thinking about Friedel Dzubas. Sandi and I have a lot of images that we want to discuss together. But I think first, let me tell you a little bit about Friedel Dzubas. What I really should just do is recommend Patricia Louie's excellent book, which was published last year, magnificently illustrated, terrific chronology, and everything you need to know about Friedel Dzubas. But should you not have the book in front of you, as Rachel said, Dzubas was born in Berlin in 1915, and he had a Jewish mother, but he had a Jewish father, but he had a non-Jewish mother. And that, of course, technically made him not Jewish. You wouldn't think that would be enough, but it seems to have been enough. He was, however, part of a group of Jewish boys who were being trained as agricultural workers because that was seen as an entry to the United States and other countries. This was a way out of Germany. So he spent 2 years in this agricultural training camp. He really wanted to study art. His parents had vetoed that. They wanted a professional, not an artist. I'm sure they didn't want a farmer either, but that in fact was his way out of Germany. And he was able to receive the immigrant ID card that allowed him to emigrate to the United States. It was not easy. He went to London for a while where he had a relative. He then got to the United States via Canada, and eventually, after a brief time with other relatives in New York, was sent to complete his agricultural commitments in Virginia. Needless to say, that was not very much to his liking. And in He left the agricultural program in 1941 and moved to New York, where he was doing anything he could. This does not sound like the beginning for an artist. However, he was looking at all the exhibitions he could. He was keeping himself informed in every way that he could, just as he had when he was still in Berlin. And he was able, in 1941, when he met a publisher who had a magazine in Chicago, to get a job as a commercial artist under the Americanized name Frank Durbin, and worked as a commercial artist for several years, again, looking at everything he could, spending time at the Art Institute of Chicago, self-educating himself. He also was starting to read Partisan Review and became aware of Clement Greenberg, who later became an important person in Friedel's life. Greenberg at that time writing the art reviews for Partisan Review. 1945, Friedel moves to New York. He starts painting, supporting himself with minimal commercial art projects. And within remarkably short time, this essentially self-taught modernist is starting to exhibit. He at prestigious galleries where he continued to paint, to show for the rest of his life. In 1948, he meets Clement Greenberg in person. At that time, Friedel had a was renting a house in Bethel, Connecticut, a short trip from the city. And Greenberg, who was looking for a place to spend the summer with his son, rented part of the house from Friedel. And that was the beginning of a lifelong friendship and lifelong support for Friedel's work from this very, very eminent critic. Friedel told me a very funny story about this period, that Greenberg was using the barn as a studio. Greenberg was a not terribly accomplished amateur perceptual painter. He painted landscapes, he painted portraits, but that summer he was trying to paint Jackson Pollocks in the barn, pouring paint. And Friedel said that Greenberg said to him, "I have to figure out how he does it." I don't know if he ever did, but I love this image of Greenberg trying to pour paint like Pollock. In any case, by 1951, Dzubas was starting to exhibit first at Thibaut Denage Gallery. He soon was taken up by Leo Castelli, who was one of the most vanguard of the dealers at the time. He showed at Robert Elcon. He showed in London with Paul Kasman, another very, very prestigious gallery. Later with Lawrence Rubin, when he opened his own gallery, and with Andre Emmerich. So this is someone who is taken very seriously, very quickly, and who is making ambitious art that is competing with the best of New York. He had close friendships with artists much younger than he was. 1915, he's the generation of the abstract expressionists. The youngest of the abstract expressionists is Robert Motherwell, who's born in 1918. So here is Dzubas, who is on the young end of the ABAX generation, but still part of that group of artists. Nevertheless, although he knew them all, and he was a member of the club, and he went to the Cedar Tavern and was friendly with them all, his real peers and contemporaries and aesthetic contemporaries with whom his work has affinities and with whom he exhibited are the next generation, the color field painters. And in fact, he was very friendly with Helen Frankenthaler. They shared a studio from 1952 to 53, and he was sharing houses for the summer with Greenberg and his wife. He was out on Long Island. So he's very, very much part of that generation, and remained associated with them aesthetically. So that's a kind of long introduction. I should also say he was a very, very charismatic teacher who taught at many places, including the Boston Museum School, when Sandi can certainly talk about that. He taught at Cornell. He was a very, very much part of the most adventurous painters who work was entirely based on color. So let's look at some images and talk about them. Okay, where is my, here we go. There he is in his studio, his Boston studio, which was, that was the studio I knew. Wasn't there a Boston studio somewhere near the downtown crossing before that though, Sandi? Do you remember?
Yes, there was a very short time.
That was the first one I visited.
Yes. Yeah. But this one in Cambridge was his mainstay.
Yeah, which was adjacent to his house.
It was, yes, definitely.
Yeah. So we've been trying to date this photograph by the paintings, and I guess the studio was finished in the late 80s. So this would have to be late 80s.
Oh no, much earlier.
No, not late 80s. Must have been early 80s. Just a second. I think I have this somewhere.
Late 70s.
The Cambridge studio?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought it was later than that. Nevertheless, this is typical Friedel. This is one of the earliest paintings. It's pretty improvisatory. It's on a bed sheet. It's not on canvas. And this is the first kind of work that he showed in New York. This is how he entered the New York art world. It's certainly related to what the abstract expressionists had been doing, but it's different. And I think we're going to see difference in between all of his peers and what Friedel was doing.
If I may say something here, it's
of
really
course,
just striking me how calligraphic it is. And
yeah.
in that way, the degree to which he is making all these different, I just spilled water on my computer. Is everything okay?
You're fine.
Okay, I'm moving slightly. The degree to which he's using calligraphy here is amazing.
Yeah.
It's unusual relative to the abstract expressionists who are expressing, not expressing themselves in calligraphically, especially.
That's true. But Friedel's work evolves quite rapidly. 57. This is after he has been sharing a studio with Frankenthaler. And this is when he's sharing the studio with Frankenthaler, this is 1952-53. She graduates from Bennington in 1949, comes back to New York, and very quickly it enters the vanguard art world. It's in the studio that she shares with Dzubas that she paints the work for which she remains best known, in spite of having had a 6-decade-long career, Mountains and Sea, which is painted in 1952. So she's inventing this method of staining and pouring. Friedel continues to be calligraphic in a very personal way. So he's very much an individual. He's very aware of what the people around him are doing. He's very knowledgeable about the history of modernism and of older art. but he's found his own way right from the start. And these are large paintings. I mean, look at the dimensions.
Beautiful.
Yeah. What's interesting is that he abandons that and starts being, this is within a few years, from 57 to 62, and paints a series of these very spare planar paintings with uninflected fields of paint, big flat areas. They're, you would think that these would have happened when he was sharing a studio with Frankenthaler, but they didn't. He found his way to these in another direction. And they're, I think, very beautiful paintings, but they really are a journey into a direction that he decided not to pursue, as we will see. I was very surprised the first time I saw one of these paintings. I didn't associate this with Friedel at all. Did you, Sandy?
I've never seen these, and no, that I would not guess if I walked in and saw them on the walls in a gallery. I would never think they were Friedel's. No,
they were shown. I mean, Hellas and some related paintings were shown, and as I say, they're really strong. And this kind of weird drawing in here, that's the one part that looks like Friedel, that strange configuration of the edges. But he I guess saw how far he could take that and moved away from it, and then pursued yet another direction. He went back to Germany for the first time in 1959. And he was very, very immersed in German Baroque churches with their very, very elaborate architecture and architectural detail. There's been a certain amount of speculation about these Black paintings, which are in their way as anomalous as the paintings we just looked at. This is another one, very, very beautiful painting, which is much more layered and much darker than we see it here. And Sandy, you were talking about the physicality of this painting.
And I'm also just realizing and wanting to say that they are huge.
Yes.
The one prior to this one must be about 7. Oh, all right. So this is 8 feet, 8 feet high, 6 feet wide. It's huge. And the next one, the Tondo, the big round one, is also, I mean, it's an 80-inch diameter. So the effect of them is so powerful, and you just can't see it here on the screen.
No.
And there is, as you say, so much texture, so that some of those whites emerge and recede and emerge and recede. They're stunning, and I would love to see them again.
Yeah, there aren't very many of them. They have been shown. They very much, I think, yes, they're about his response to the elaboration of Baroque architecture. That's one thing that's in there. It must also have been fairly traumatic to go back to Germany after having fled. And he didn't even hear from his family. He didn't get any letters from his family after leaving for years, until after the war. He didn't ever hear from them. So it's a very complicated relationship to his background. And I mean, we can read whatever you want to read into these paintings. The bottom line is that they're absolutely potent and original and extraordinary paintings. But Friedel was a complicated guy, and I think these are all complicated paintings. The size of them, Sandy, you mentioned, he was a small man. And you know, these are very wristy paintings. I mean, was he crawling around on the canvas? What was he doing?
He probably had white socks on his feet, and probably did step on the canvases from time to time. I think that was very common for artists who were painting, basically laying long swaths of unprimed canvas on the floor, and priming them on the floor with a base coat, and then continue working as Pollock did. It was a way to deal with a huge, enormous size. To reach the middle of the canvas, you had to put on your socks and walk on it from time to time.
Of course,
although some of the artists, and I think Friedel did as well, invent very long, cold brushes, like Matisse did when he worked vertically.
Yeah. Friedel put things on the wall also.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But you mentioned Pollock, and Pollock is certainly in here somewhere. But it's calligraphy. It's not dripping. It's a real contact with the canvas.
Yeah, this is brush. This is this is a wall painting.
But he's always about the hand in some way. And then everything changes, and you start getting the paintings that he's most associated with. I mean, I think when I think of Dzubas, this is the kind of painting I think of, the big, like overscaled strokes of unnameable color that fray off. It's like listening to Beethoven. They're so full of drama. And that is another thing that separates him from the artists that he exhibited with. His colleagues, his peers. He was in group shows with Kenneth Noland, with Morris Louis, with Helen Frankenthaler, with Jules Olitsky. And while their work can be intensely moving, and like Friedel, they were obsessed with the expressive possibilities of color, there's something else going on in his work. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. And, again, look at the dimensions. This is another 8-footer.
Yeah. Yep.
That's 8 foot square. You'd never know it from the reproduction, but that's something no one else is doing. This sense of the giant brush mark. I guess it's a kind of calligraphy also. The calligraphy that you pointed out in the first image.
What he's doing here is also just starting to find a kind of expression in the gradual change from translucency and opaque to the feathered gradual edges that you can see right down through the center. It was a way of bringing it's dramatic. It's very dramatic, and the way that he's creating edges, these very soft, brushy edges, and that become harder in places and wide open at the top. So the whole thing is really coming together as one piece, but you carried back and forth all over the surface between this dramatic exchange and contrast, very dark, very light, very soft, very hard.
Which is also something that color field painters weren't supposed to be doing.
Right.
You weren't supposed to go dark to light. It was all supposed to be close valued so that the color really spoke.
Yeah.
Friedel was not listening to that.
There you go.
Yeah. And of course, that means there's an implication of atmospheric space and things moving in space. The word, you could keep ending up with dramatic, theatrical. You think about, Kenneth Nolan's very uninflected, ravishing bars of color, or any of his, diamonds or his circles. And this is not doing that at all. This is doing something incredibly original. And I wonder, we were talking about this, you and I, Sandi, whether it's Friedel's early experience of German expressionist painting. That he's,
yes.
What do you think?
Yes, of course, yes. Well, the drama and the expressionism and the, depth of feeling.
Yeah. And the wild and crazy color. You can't really name any of these colors. There's definitely not out of the tube.
They're very inspiring.
Yeah. I love this painting.
Here's something else.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that, sorry, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just looking at the 21 feet. We're getting bigger and bigger now.
I used to have this fantasy when, remember Friedel had the trapeze in the Cambridge studio?
Yes.
And I always had this fantasy image of his hanging upside down from the trapeze with a big brush in his hand and swinging back and forth over the canvas. It obviously was not true, but it should have been true. That there's that sense of fraying off, the sense of that stroke happening while we look, or alternatively disappearing while we look, gives these paintings of extraordinary sense of animation. And that also is unique to him. You get some of it in Frankenthaler at this time as well. And I think that may have been one of the strongest things they had in common, their refusal to do the expected, their refusal to exclude any kind of emotion from their paintings. They remained very, very close friends. And clearly we're looking at each other's work.
Yeah. I have to say, looking at this one, I think this is filled with emotion. The effort to keep emotion out may have been huge effort to keep it out, but it's there.
He never tried to keep it out, I don't think.
Yeah.
I was saying she and Frankenthaler and Friedel refused to keep emotion out, unlike some of their peers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Think about Helen's paintings of the 70s, which are like these abstracted landscapes in some ways that have that same kind of dark and light drama.
I love when in this one, the way you have this strip of blue. I mean, it happens in the whole painting, and I'm very impressed in this flat little image on a screen that you can see the depth of color in this what might be called, you know, an empty space where all these gorgeous browns and gold and brown greens and are the ground, but actually are moving way up to the surface, that there's so much dimensionality in. And the blue stroke, well, I don't know, is that way up in heaven or is that very down to where to locate that blue space? It's just fascinating. And it takes it takes the role of a character, you know, of beautiful painting.
Yeah, you're right about that instability of the space. What's in front of what? What's on top? What's far away? What's full of volume and space in a very original way. And that's something he does all the time. This sense of each of these strokes being something as real as a person in some ways. And this pale blue that's a million miles away. Pale blue isn't supposed to go a million miles away. And certainly.
I was just thinking I have to get the Davis Museum too. It looks to me like they have a number of Dzubas paintings in that collection. And
they do.
And anyway, I'm fantasizing here now of letting them know that Sandi Slone thinks they should be giving Dzubas a show. So
I'm right behind you, Sandy. We want to do this. In fact, Rachel and I have been working with Patricia Louis on that very fantasy, and there's interest in Germany where he has not had a major show. His work was shown when Andre Emmerich had a gallery in Switzerland, and consequently there's some very important works in German collections, but he hasn't had the major exhibition, and we want that to happen. It has to happen here. There was a wonderful show that the late Charles Millard organized for the Hirshhorn Museum, but it didn't travel, and not enough people saw it. But at the very least, the Davis Museum should put this up. It's a beautiful painting. And it's such a contrarian painting. You know, if you read about color field painters, if you read about the painters with whom Dzubas exhibited and who were his peers, you hear about the opticality of the paint, how the paint is supposed to disappear into the canvas. And so it's a pure sensation of color, not in any way a physical sensation. The idea that, as I say, things should be the same value so that you really see the chromatic differences rather than the tonal differences. This painting is not doing anything of that. It's doing everything that old master painting does in a wholly contemporary way.
I'm taking a a screenshot. This color, I just have to have this color. Looks okay.
Are you finished?
I'm finished.
Good. And this is one of the paintings in this Henkel collection, which is spectacular. They are, as I always think of, as I say, hearing Beethoven when I look at Dzubas. There's that same rich orchestration, there's unexpected harmonies, very, very moving. When I was a rookie curator, the museum I was working for bought a Dzubas just about this time. And that was, our women's committee had managed to raise the astronomical sum of $28,000. And so we bought this very, very wonderful Dzubas of just about this time. And then you have paintings like this. This is 24.5 feet. And one of the extraordinary things about these, one of the many extraordinary things about these, and just to backtrack, I mean, this is certainly symphonic in terms of the way he's using color, these chords of color and the wide range of this is, you know, maybe this is the little piccolo grace notes to the big things that are happening in the string section. But a painting like this would begin with a tiny sketch. This is definitely not scale. This is 24 feet. This is maybe, what do you think, 12 inches, Sandy?
Yes.
Little sketches. Yeah.
Yeah.
He would work out the idea in miniature. They were all over the studio. They were piled on the floor. And this ability to make a very small study and then move into this monumental, as I say, symphonic painting without losing, not only without losing the energy of the small work, but gaining energy and gaining resonance. That's pretty remarkable.
I don't know how he could do it. It is remarkable. It's unusual to be able to, and of course, the big one is not only enormously different in scale. I can't exaggerate it. There's no way to exaggerate it. It's so much bigger in scale, but he gets all the expressiveness into the large one. That's where he gets the emotion and the power and the symphony and the drama into this great big one. And he can't get into the little one. The small one gives him sort of a map.
Yeah.
It's still, and it's amazing.
Yeah.
It always struck me that way.
The first time I saw the small ones, I thought, no, this can't be the way it works. I was so familiar. I had worked in a Canadian museum, and the heroes of the start of Canadian modernism, a group of plein air landscape painters called the Group of Seven, who would go out and paint the North American landscape on these tiny little boards. And they're about 8 by 10 at the most. And they're really vital and alive and responsive to what they were seeing. And then they take them back to the studio and make these large dead paintings out of them. They lost all the vitality of the original conception.
Yeah.
And Friedel, it's exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
And the scale thing gets to be absolutely astonishing.
Yeah.
In 1975,
that's 56 feet.
56 feet. Well, you remember that painting. It was in the Shawmut Bank.
Yes.
You could walk past it from the gardens in Boston and look in and see this thing. It was commissioned by a very astute Boston collector and his business partner, who had a kind of art advisory service, Lewis Cabot and Joseph Henderson. And they commissioned this work for the Shawmut Bank. And if procession is symphonic, this is operatic. This is the ring cycle. You're sitting through 4 days of 4-hour performances. And the extraordinary thing is that this disappeared. It was lost. When the Bank of America took over the Shawmut Bank, they owned a couple of other good Dzubases. No one knew what had happened to it. And thank goodness, Patricia Louis, who, as I say, written this brilliant book on Friedel and done very, very important research, she found it. And it was exhibited in New York a few years ago. There's a building on Fifth Avenue which has a lobby that is an exhibition space, and it was the first time it had been up for years. It's just staggeringly wonderful.
Oh, it's amazing to see it there, to see it again after so many years.
Yeah. Could use a little conservation. We hope we'll have a chance to, someone will do that. But this is the grand manner, in the grandest of grand manners. I mean, you have to go to the, I don't know, the 17th century, and you think about Tintoretto painting that acres and acres of wall of the Palazzo Ducale before you get something of this scale.
I think if you had to say one sentence about who Dzubas, the artist, is, you've just said it. You have just said it. That's where his mind was. That is what his muse was. What you just said, Karen.
Well, of course, he traveled extensively in Italy, and he was like a sponge. He would look at everything and soak it up, just as he had educated himself that way. That's how he made himself a painter, by going to museums and going to exhibitions. Didn't have an MFA.
Well, no one did those days.
No one did in those days, no. So this is another one of the paintings that's in Germany. They're all from the 70s, because that's when the Emmerich had the gallery in Zurich. But so there's this very good representation of a very good moment in Friedel's evolution. But we would love to contextualize this with works, earlier and later works, in an exhibition. And so throughout the 70s, they are this kind of symphonic, operatic, very dramatic painting continues. He gets more and more interested in, I think, scale shifts within the paintings. You know, the kind of very small elements of these becoming more, not just going to transparent, but the edges have more character of their own. And then what's also very interesting, and again unusual, is this kind of overlapping. Because you think of someone like Morris Louis, who's setting the standard in some ways for color-based painting, and nothing overlaps. If they touch, you don't have this kind of three-dimensionality. As you say, his muse are the old masters. His mind is back there. I'm sure he's pitting himself against, you know, every Renaissance painter he ever admired. He's not pitting himself against his contemporaries.
This is gorgeous.
Yeah.
This whole upper left area and the overlapping. You're absolutely right. All this overlapping in the center, particularly.
This is so three-dimensional in terms of like cosmic space. And he doesn't let up for a minute. 173 inches, so that's more than 10, about more than 11 feet.
More than
huge.
that.
Yeah, more than that. 144, yeah.
15
more than
feet.
about 15, yeah.
15 feet.
Yeah. And as you say, what would be a ground for anyone else is this very active, beautifully modulated kind of color. Look at that. I love that part. This is also in an important German collection, a museum which is about to open in Wiesbaden. I rest my case. I mean, you know,
Yes.
the last time the Met did the ring cycle, my husband and I went, and yeah, that's like sitting through Siegfried with a really good tenor. It's and
good.
enormous.
Yeah, it's great they have this in Wiesbaden. They're lucky.
Yeah. Well, we are fantasizing about Wiesbaden doing a Dzubas show to contextualize the very good paintings that they have.
I bet they will.
We hope they will. It would be superb to reintroduce Dzubas to his home country.
Yes.
You know, it's similar thing with Hans Hofmann, who has very few Hofmanns in Germany. And even though he's had this enormous influence on English painters, as you know, but we did a retrospective of Hofmann in Germany, and that was a big deal. So let's hope we can do it for Dzubas. And then, as you can see, what's starting to happen, they get more complicated. I mean, if I just showed you this, you'd say, oh yes, it's another one of those paintings. But look what's happening in here. It's getting more and more complex. And again, another very big painting. This kind of horizontal, hard edge drawing that's coming in here, that's new. That contrast of the crispness and the length of this being exaggerated, and then even more unpredictable.
Great. I never saw these. Great. This is so great.
He just let loose. He just, you know, was trying more and more and more. And finally,
see, it's just in that one, just brushing over everything. Speaking of, he's just painted right over he started with this bright, colorful layer. It's up there, and he's come in with these browns and oranges and greens. And so he's really letting the, playing with layering and transparency. And then these sharp little ribbons in the middle. It's all, he's experimenting with something really new here.
Yeah. And yet at the same time, this is the kind of layering and the kind of depth that he's getting in the black paintings.
Yeah.
After Germany, you know, nothing important is going to get lost.
That's right.
But these last paintings of his, I think are so astonishing. Each one of these is a separate canvas. And he did them separately and then was composing with these the way he was composing with the big brush strokes. So you have this almost 21-foot wall of these intense, wild and crazy patterns. I mean, maybe the paintings are so big because he was, as I say, a small man.
I think he said that. You know, it could be legend, but I do remember distinctly that either he said it or someone I knew said it to them in answer to why do you make such large paintings, such huge paintings? He said, because I'm a small guy.
Probably true.
Anyway, that's my story.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of stories, Sandy, that we probably shouldn't tell. He was, as we say, a busy boy.
Yes, well, there are a lot of great stories too. Incredible stories.
And he clearly was a very inspiring teacher. I mean, I know anyone who
they were knocking down the doors to get into his classes, to get into his seminars.
Yeah. Well, we have this wonderful legacy. We hope that we can get the exhibition going. Wish there had been paintings after this, but at least we have these.
Yes.
So I think we have time for some questions. Rachel, do you want?
Yes, thank you so much, Karen and Sandy. This was a very personal view of Friedel Dzubas that you allowed us, and we have a few questions that go back to the beginning, really, of your conversation, where Ori asks whether there's any connection between his black paintings and those of Ed Reinhardt being done at approximately the same time or just after. Would he have influenced Reinhardt? And was he influenced by Goya's black paintings?
A very interesting question. And he must have known what Reinhardt was doing. I mean, he was certainly, as I say, Friedel was going to the Cedar Tavern. And he was going, everybody went to all the exhibitions in those days. And the art world was not yet as polarized into the de Kooning and the Pollock camps. But I don't know is the answer. The other thing, the German connection, maybe they knew each other in another way. I don't know. Patricia, I'm sure, knows the answer to this. She knows all the answers. We'll have to ask her. As far as the Goya black paintings go, as someone who is very sophisticated about and knowledgeable about old master art, I'm sure he knew about them. But I don't know if he ever went to Madrid. I know he spent a lot of time traveling in Italy. Very interesting question.
I never heard him talk about Spain or Madrid. And I mean, it may have happened earlier in his life before I knew him. And of course, I first met him, I figured it's around 1972, 73. And met him and his wife. We rendezvoused together when we were all traveling separately in Europe on the steps of Saint-Germain-des-Prés. And he, I think, this was in the early 80s, and they had been in Germany. Germany was part of that trip. Nothing about Spain. I've never heard, but I may have missed it. I don't know everything.
Yeah, well, I never heard it either, but I may have missed it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's another question about a Spanish painter, Guerrero, who lived in New York City at the same time, says Susan, whether they knew each other.
I don't know.
Yeah. So a lot of.
I mean, he was in and out of New York. I mean, he was teaching out of New York. He was teaching in Boston. He would. There were various. He was the classic serial monogamist, and there was a long line. So as I say, he was a very busy guy, and he was traveling around a lot.
And they were
in
all
relation to various liaisons.
Very young. And
very pretty. Very pretty.
And students. Yeah. Yeah, very typical. He was not unusual.
He was not unusual, but I think he had
good taste.
I think he was busier than most, anyway. But so he had his circle of artist friends that he exhibited with, and were very much Greenberg was the kind of linchpin at that point for these artists. So that as far as I know, and it was through those artists that I met him originally, and they tended to be at that point. Noland was living near Bennington, Vermont, in Shaftesbury. Olitsky was teaching at Bennington. Frankenthaler had already a studio in Connecticut, as well as in the Upper East Side, where she lived. So they were traveling around to each other's locations. Before that, he was spending quite a lot of time in the summer on Long Island. So he was part of the Hamptons group.
Mhm.
So that was his circle.
So I'm just remembering that in the early 80s, Friedel and I decided that we wanted to be in New York, and he and his wife, I guess it was Marianne at that time, we came down looking for lofts, and we looked at this great old building in Tribeca, and nothing ever came of it. And just by incredible, crazy coincidence, because it took me a long time to remember, and for my husband to remember, that the loft I'm living in since 1987 is the very same one that
for heaven's sakes.
I had looked at years before, a number of years before. So that was pretty amazing. I mean, I've moved into this one because it is just an artist building. You had to be certified by the city to live at certain, you had to have a certificate to prove that you were an artist.
Yeah.
Live into certain places in Soho and Tribeca. And there it was. So here we are. And that was that's just a little fairly meaningless anecdote.
But interesting. But interesting.
Yeah. One last question that I have for the two of you. I mean, I'm amazed at the space that you called the cosmic space that he creates. Like they, you know, even more in the originals actually than in the works that you can see on the screen now. They create a huge space, a vast space, and I'm just wondering whether this has to made him different from all the other artists that he was working together with or affiliated with, because somehow his work was a little bit apart from the work of the other American artists. Am I right about that?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the artists with, you know, in the group shows that he was in, who the other artists are, the other artists who show at the galleries that represented him, and the artists who were his friends, his work has a kind of spatial quality, an atmospheric quality, and a dramatic quality, which I think is wholly his own. And I think it's not an oversimplification to say that he remains European in that quality, that it stays with him.
I think that's quite true. Yeah.
And in spite of his living you know, quite a simple life, I mean, Sandy had pointed out that his house in Cambridge, where he built the studio, was in a working class neighborhood. It wasn't an elegant neighborhood, but he, you know, he liked clothing in nice fabrics. If you patted Friedel on the shoulder, it was cashmere, and he was very fond of very good food and wine. So he cooked. He was a good cook. He was an appalling driver, but he was a very good cook. Most frightening automobile ride I ever had in my life was when he picked me up at the station once in Boston. Never let him do it again.
He was able to, I mentioned part of this, to lie flat on his back in the ocean with his toes pointed up. A lot of people can do that, but he could do it and read a newspaper at the same time.
Read it. I never saw that. That's fabulous. Yeah.
I have proof.
He liked good restaurants. Going to visit him was always very pleasurable. from that point of view.
Oh, yeah.
And
But he was a
music,
complicated
and music.
and music and music.
Mhm.
So, and I think that's all somehow reflected in those paintings. So it's a very sensual painting.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much, Karen and Sandi, for sharing your memories with us. This was a very special treat. Thank you so much. And this is an event of our online project, Identity, Art and Migration, in which we investigate US immigration of European refugees during the first half of the 20th century through the lens of 7 artist case studies: Annie Albers, Friedel Dzubas, Eva Hesse, Rudi Lesser, Lili René, Arthur Schick, and Fritz Ascher. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for discussing with us, Karen and Sandi. Stay healthy, everyone, and be well, and stay in touch. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rachel.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Thank you, Sandi.
And thank you, Karen. Fun.